She sits with broken people for a living. How could that not break her, too? That's what my father said. Not once. Not in a moment of frustration he later regretted. He said it at Christmas. He said it at Lily's birthday. He said it at every Sunday dinner where I made the mistake of showing up and believing this time would be different. He said it so many times that my mother started repeating it to her friends at church. He said it so many times that my brother stopped questioning whether it was true. And then he said it to a judge. My name is Rosamond Trelawney. I'm 39 years old. I've spent 14 years in the United States Navy. 9 of those years embedded with a unit I am not permitted to name, in locations I am not permitted to describe, doing work that requires a security clearance my father doesn't know exists. He filed for custody of my daughter. He called me psychologically unfit. The court appointed an independent evaluator, a psychiatrist, a man named Dr. Nathan Hale. They don't know that yet. None of them do. Not my father. Not my brother. Not the private evaluator my father found on a community center bulletin board and paid $1,200 to confirm what he already believed. But I do. I knew the moment Lieutenant Commander Patricia Scott slid the court filing across her desk at the JAG office in Norfolk, tapped one line on the second page, and said quietly, "Roz, look at who they assigned." If you've ever been the person in the room who knows more than everyone assumes, hit that subscribe button right now. Let me tell you how we got here. When I pulled onto my parents' street in Chesapeake that Sunday in late October, the sky was flat gray. The kind of light that doesn't commit. Not overcast enough to promise rain. Not bright enough to cast a shadow. Just gray. Neutral. The way a room looks when someone has removed everything personal from it. Dale's truck was already in the driveway. The big one. The one with the Cornerstone Climate Solutions decal across the tailgate, because Dale doesn't own things quietly. I parked on the street. I sat in the car for 12 seconds before I opened the door. I counted them. Counting is a clinical self-regulation strategy, a grounding technique I've taught to men who have seen things that would flatten most people for the rest of their lives. I know what it is. I know why it works. I used it anyway. Damp leaves stuck to the front walk. Pot roast pushed through a cracked kitchen window, heavy and familiar. There was a wind chime on the porch I didn't remember from childhood. It clinked like it didn't know what song to play anymore. No one came to the door when my car pulled up. No wave from the window. No movement behind the curtain. That was it. No warmth. No welcome. Just the sound of my own shoes on concrete my father poured himself 30 years ago. When I stepped inside, Clyde was in his recliner. He did not stand. "Rosie's here," he said. Not to me. To the room. The way you'd announce that the mail had arrived. The mantel above the fireplace held 6 framed photographs. I knew them all. Dale's wedding. Dale and his wife at the Chesapeake Chamber of Commerce dinner. Dale shaking hands with a regional distributor. Dale's company van parked in front of a new construction site. Dale and Clyde at the VFW post, arms crossed, matching grins. And Lily. One photo of Lily. Taken by Clyde at a school pickup he had inserted himself into without asking me. She was holding his hand in the photo. She was looking up at him. Not a single one of me. I had been erased from this mantle the way you remove a stain from a countertop. Not violently. Patiently. One photo replaced at a time, over years, until the surface looked like I had never been there at all. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd rewritten me. Growing up in the Trelawney household meant earning affection like rent. Dale paid his on time every month. I was always behind. My mother came from the kitchen wiping her hands on a towel. She hugged me. It lasted 2 seconds. She smelled like rosemary and brown sugar. "Lily's in the living room," she said. I set her up with cartoons. She had even set the dining table with the white plates she used to save for Easter. Pot roast with root vegetables, baked squash with brown sugar, cornbread so buttery it stuck to the knife. It looked perfect, just like it did every holiday, and somehow more dangerous than any operational briefing I'd ever sat through. Dale was leaning against the kitchen doorway with a bottle of beer, talking to his wife about a ductwork contract. He glanced at me and gave a nod. The kind of nod you give a neighbor whose name you've forgotten. "Hey, Roz." "Hey, Dale." "Still doing the consulting thing?" "Same contracts, different problems." He took a pull of his beer and turned back to his wife. That was the full extent of his curiosity. We sat. Clyde said grace. He thanked God for family, for health, for Dale's new commercial account with a property management company in Norfolk. He did not mention me. He did not mention my work. He mentioned Lily once in the possessive. "And Lord, thank you for that little girl in the next room. Keep her safe and rooted." Rooted. That word again. He had been planting it for months, in conversations with Margaret, in his statement to Dr. Webb, in the petition itself. Rooted meant stationary. Rooted meant Chesapeake. Rooted meant him. I folded my napkin beside my untouched plate. Margaret noticed. She always noticed. She said nothing. She always said nothing. The conversation turned, the way it always does in that house, to Dale, his new service van, his employee retention strategy, a customer who tried to undercut him on a warranty claim. Dale spoke about it with the confidence of a man who has never been asked to justify his existence at his own family's table. Clyde listened with visible pride. He laughed at Dale's jokes. He asked follow-up questions. He leaned forward in his chair. Then he leaned back, looked at me. The shift was physical. I could feel the room tilt. "So," he said. Webb finished his report. Even the candle flame on the table seemed to hesitate. I said nothing. I picked up my water glass, took a sip, set it down. 14 pages, Clyde continued. He was watching me the way a man watches a mousetrap he's just set. Very thorough, very detailed. He understands what's going on. "What's going on?" I repeated. Flat, neutral. With you, with the situation. He waved his hand vaguely. The instability. Denial, I would learn, was their specialty. Not denial of the truth. Denial that they even needed to look for it. Dale set his beer down. He leaned forward. This was his cue. I understood the choreography. Clyde sets the stage. Dale delivers the line. "Look, Ross." Dale's voice was louder now. Practiced. The voice of a man who gives estimates to homeowners for a living. "Nobody's saying you're a bad person, but you're gone all the time. You talk to damaged men all day. That is your world. That is what you bring home to my niece." He paused. He looked around the table for confirmation. His wife looked at her plate. Margaret's hand tightened on her fork. "It's not even a real job, is it?" Clyde said. Not a question. A verdict. Not like nursing. Not like something you can explain. You sit in a room and you listen to people talk about their problems. That's what you do. And then you come home to a 7-year-old who needs stability, not a mother who disappears for weeks without explanation. I stayed silent. My hands stayed folded in my lap. Webb says it right there in the report. Combat proximity instability syndrome. That's a clinical term, Rosie. That's not me making something up. It is not a clinical term. It does not appear in the DSM-5. It does not appear in any peer-reviewed publication in the history of behavioral health research. Dr. Marcus Webb coined it for the purpose of a 14-page document he was paid $1,200 to write after 2 90-minute sessions with my father and 0 sessions with me. But I didn't say that. Not yet. She won't even talk about what she does, Dale added, his voice rising. You ask her a simple question, and she gives you nothing. Analysis. Consulting. That's not an answer. That's a wall. And a kid doesn't need a mother who lives behind a wall. Laughter from Clyde. A single, sharp bark. Behavioral health consulting. He said it the way you'd say a child's imaginary friend's name. You know what that sounds like to normal people? It sounds like you're hiding something. And Webb agrees. Pathological secretiveness consistent with dissociative avoidance. That's in the report, too. I took a breath. I looked at my mother. She was staring at the roast on her plate like it held instructions she couldn't read. I'm not hiding anything, Dad. Then explain it. Right now. At this table. Tell us exactly what you do. Tell us who you work for. Tell us why a 7-year-old girl has to stay with a neighbor for 10 days while her mother flies off to God knows where for a contract obligation. He said those last 2 words like they were coated in something foul. Every guest at that table was watching me. Dale with his arms crossed, his wife with her eyes down. Margaret with her hand trembling against the tablecloth. What they didn't know, what I could never explain at that table, in that house, in that zip code, was that the 10-day absence Clyde described as neglect was my 6th deployment cycle. That the contract obligation was a forward operating location I cannot name. That I had returned 48 hours before Lily's school spring concert and sat in the 3rd row and watched my daughter sing and held my face perfectly still because I had spent the previous 9 days conducting fitness for duty evaluations on men who carry the kind of weight that would crush the people sitting at this table. They hadn't just forgotten me. They'd rewritten me. They had painted a picture of a woman living in delusion. A quiet woman with a fake job and a fragile mind, and a daughter who deserved better. Clyde reached beneath the newspaper on the side table next to his recliner. He pulled out a manila folder, thick, tabbed. He set it on the dining table next to the cornbread. This is everything, he said. Webb's report, my statements, Margaret's statement, Dale's statement, Lily's school attendance records showing every pickup I did because you weren't there. He slid it toward me. The hearing is in 3 weeks, Rosie. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to protect that little girl. He looked at Dale. Dale nodded. Clyde looked at Margaret. She didn't look up. He looked at me. You're not fit, he said. And now it's in writing. I folded my napkin. I placed it on the table beside my untouched plate. I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I didn't reach for the folder. I walked to the living room. I picked up Lily. She was warm and heavy and smelled like crayons. She wrapped her arms around my neck without being asked. We're going home, sweetheart. Already. Already. I carried her past the dining room, past Clyde in his chair with his folder, past Dale with his crossed arms, past my mother, who finally looked up, and whose expression I will carry for the rest of my life. Because it wasn't anger, and it wasn't confusion. It was the look of a woman who had signed something she didn't understand and was only now beginning to wonder what it cost. The front door closed behind me. The wind chime caught the October air and rang once, thin and uncertain. 3 weeks. That's what Clyde had given me. 3 weeks until he walked into a courtroom with a folder full of fabricated terminology and purchased opinions, and the quiet, corrosive certainty that he was saving my daughter from me. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the court had already appointed its own evaluator. A real one. A psychiatrist with a commission in the United States Navy Reserve, a rotation history through Naval Station Norfolk, and 4 years of direct professional overlap with the operational psychologist Clyde Trelawney, had just called unfit. Commander Nathan Hale. They hadn't counted on one thing. Someone in that courtroom was going to know exactly who I am. The courtroom in Chesapeake was smaller than most people imagine courtrooms to be. No cathedral ceilings, no mahogany grandeur. Just a low-ceilinged room with fluorescent lighting that buzzed at a frequency I associated with forward operating bases. Gray carpet, plastic chairs with fabric seats that had been reupholstered at least twice. A judge's bench made of laminate, not oak. I arrived 40 minutes early. I wore a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, black slacks, low heels, my hair pulled back. Nothing flashy, nothing provocative, nothing that could be read as performance. On my left lapel, the small, brushed silver navy anchor pin, approximately the size of a thumbnail. Most people who saw it assumed it was decorative, a piece of costume jewelry. A sentimental accessory a military-adjacent woman might pick up at a gift shop near a base. It was not decorative. It was a Naval Special Warfare Command Staff identifier, issued to cleared support personnel embedded with NSW units. It is not sold at base exchanges. It does not appear in any publicly available catalog. There are fewer than 40 of them in active circulation at any given time. I wore it because it was mine, and because today, of all days, I wanted something real against my chest. Clyde arrived at 20 minutes to the hour. He wore a sport coat I had never seen before, new, stiff at the shoulders, a tie with a pattern that didn't quite work. He had dressed for this the way a man dresses for a job interview. He believes he's already been offered. Behind him came Dale, in pressed khakis and a button-down, looking like he'd been coached on courtroom demeanor by someone who'd watched a legal drama the night before. Behind Dale, Margaret. She was carrying her purse with both hands. Her knuckles were white. They sat on the opposite side of the gallery. Clyde positioned himself at the center of their row. He placed the manila folder on his lap. He looked straight ahead. He did not look at me. Dr. Marcus Webb arrived next. He wore a gray suit and carried a leather portfolio that looked more expensive than anything else about him. He shook Clyde's hand. He shook Dale's hand. He sat in the row behind them and opened his portfolio to a tabbed page. My attorney, a civilian family law practitioner named David Morse, sat beside me. He was competent, thorough. He had filed our response brief 2 weeks prior. But the brief was not what would matter today. What would matter was the man who had not yet entered the room. The judge was the Honorable Patricia Coleman. 61. 23 years on the family court bench. She had reviewed both evaluations, Webb's private report and the court-ordered independent assessment. She had reviewed the guardian ad litem's notes. She had reviewed my service record to the extent that an unclassified summary permitted, which was not far. She called the hearing to order at 9 sharp. Clyde's attorney, a solo practitioner named Gerald Harris, who handled mostly estate work and had taken this case as a referral, opened with the petition. He was organized. He was clear. He laid out the argument the way Clyde had built it. A pattern of absence, a pattern of evasion. a pattern of psychological instability inferred from occupational proximity to trauma. He quoted Webb's report directly. Combat proximity instability syndrome. He said it like it was settled science. He said it like it was something you could look up. He called Dr. Marcus Webb to the stand. Webb was smooth. He had the cadence of a man accustomed to sounding authoritative in rooms where no one checks the footnotes. He described his methodology. 2 sessions with the petitioner. A review of submitted statements. A literature review he characterized as extensive. He used the phrase, consistent with known trauma-adjacent deterioration models, 3 times. He referenced no specific studies. He cited no peer-reviewed sources by name. He described Rosamond Trelawney, described me, as presenting markers of emotional flattening, occupational enmeshment, and pathological secretiveness consistent with dissociative avoidance. He had never met me. He had never spoken to me. He had never requested a session with me. His entire clinical portrait was built on the testimony of the man who had filed the petition. I sat still. My hands stayed folded in my lap. My face held. This was not the first time I had listened to someone construct a false psychological profile in a high-stakes environment. I had watched it happen in theater. I had watched operators be mischaracterized by clinicians who had never set foot in a combat zone. I had spent 9 years learning the difference between a real assessment and a performance dressed in clinical language. Webb was performing. The thing about silence is that it isn't always passive. Sometimes silence is the sharpest answer. David Morse cross-examined Webb with the precision of a man who had done his research. He asked Webb to define combat proximity instability syndrome. Webb paused. He described it as an emerging framework. David asked him to name a single peer-reviewed publication in which the term appeared. Webb adjusted his tie. He could not. David asked how many sessions Webb had conducted with the subject of his evaluation. Webb said the subject had declined to participate. David asked whether Webb's methodology met the Daubert standard for admissible expert testimony. Gerald Harris objected. Judge Coleman overruled. Webb's left hand moved to his portfolio. He flipped a page. He flipped it back. He could not find what he was looking for. David asked one final question. Dr. Webb, are you board certified in any psychological or psychiatric specialty recognized by the American Board of Professional Psychology? Webb cleared his throat. I hold a doctoral degree in counseling psychology from Pacific Western University. Pacific Western University closed in 2006 after losing its accreditation. David let the silence hold for 4 seconds. Then he sat down. Judge Coleman made a note. She did not look up. Then she said, "The court will now hear from the independent evaluator, Dr. Nathan Hale." The side door opened. Commander Nathan Hale entered the courtroom the way a man enters a room when he has spent 30 years in medicine and 12 in uniform. No hurry, no theater. Gray at the temples, clean-shaven, a navy blue suit that fit him like he'd owned it for years and never needed to replace it. He carried a single file folder, slim, unadorned, no tabs. He was sworn in. He stated his name. He stated his credentials. Board-certified psychiatrist. Fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. Commander, United States Navy Reserve, Medical Corps. 22 years of clinical practice. 12 years of military service across active and reserve components. Rotations through Naval Station Norfolk, Naval Medical Center Portsmouth, and, he paused here, just slightly, support structures attached to special warfare commands in the Tidewater area. Gerald Harris shifted in his chair. Clyde leaned forward. Judge Coleman asked Dr. Hale to describe his methodology. Hale spoke the way I remembered him speaking in clinical reviews at Little Creek. Measured. Exact. No filler. No performance. I conducted 3 structured clinical interviews with the respondent over a 6-week period, he said. I administered the MMPI-2RF, the PAI, and the PCPTSD-5. I reviewed her employment history to the extent permitted by her security classification. I reviewed the petitioner's submitted statements. I reviewed Dr. Webb's report in full. I also reviewed the respondent's professional evaluation history as documented by her chain of command, portions of which were provided to me through appropriate channels with her written consent. He opened the slim folder. My findings are as follows. The room was still. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to quiet. Lieutenant Commander Trelawney's psychological profile reflects no indicators of dissociative pathology, affective instability, or trauma-related impairment. Her MMPI-2 RF validity scales are within normal limits. Her PAI profiles show elevated conscientiousness, elevated stress tolerance, and no clinical elevations on any pathology scale. Her PCPTSD-5 score is a 2 out of 5. The clinical threshold is 3. He turned a page. In my professional opinion, Dr. Webb's report suffers from 3 critical methodological failures. First, the evaluation was conducted without direct clinical contact with the subject. Second, the diagnostic terminology employed, specifically combat proximity instability syndrome, does not exist in the DSM-5, the ICD-11, or any recognized diagnostic framework. Third, the report's conclusions are built entirely on statements provided by the petitioner, who is not a clinical professional and who has a material interest in the outcome. Clyde's hand tightened on the manila folder in his lap. The edges crumpled slightly under his grip. I would further note, Hale continued, that the term pathological secretiveness, as used in Dr. Webb's report, reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of the respondent's professional obligations. Lieutenant Commander Trelawney holds a top-secret/SCI security clearance. Her inability to discuss the specifics of her work is not a personality defect. It is a legal requirement enforced under federal statute. Gerald Harris stood. Your Honor, the petitioner was not made aware of any military rank or— Sit down, Mr. Harris, Judge Coleman said. She did not look at him. Hale continued. His gaze moved, for the first time since he'd taken the stand, from the judge to me. His eyes found the pin, the brushed silver anchor on my left lapel, small, unadorned, the NSW command staff identifier that most people in most rooms would never notice. Nathan Hale was not most people. His expression didn't change, not visibly, but something behind his eyes settled. A recognition that was not surprise, it was confirmation. The way a clinician looks when a differential diagnosis resolves into certainty. He looked back at Judge Coleman. Your Honor, I want to be transparent about something the court should know. In the interest of full disclosure, I am acquainted with Lieutenant Commander Trelawney professionally. We served in adjacent clinical roles at a naval installation in the Tidewater area for approximately 4 years. During that period, I conducted a readiness audit of her clinical documentation protocols as part of a command review. Gerald Harris was on his feet again. Your Honor, this is a conflict of— Mr. Harris, I said, sit down. Dr. Hale, continue. The court appointed you with full knowledge of your military background. Your disclosure is noted. Hale nodded once. During that audit, I reviewed Lieutenant Commander Trelawney's case management procedures, her clinical notes, to the extent classification permitted, and her fitness for duty evaluation methodology. I also observed her professional conduct across multiple operational cycles. He paused. He closed the folder. I will say this plainly, Your Honor. In 22 years of clinical practice and 12 years of military service, Lieutenant Commander Trelawney's stress tolerance profile is among the highest I have encountered in any uniformed professional. She does not merely meet the psychological threshold for competent parenting. She exceeds the standardized norms we use to evaluate the personnel she supports. The courtroom did not move. Dale's arms, which had been crossed since the hearing began, dropped to his sides. His mouth opened, then closed. Margaret's purse slid 2 inches down her lap. She did not catch it. Clyde stared at Hale. The color had begun its slow retreat from his face, starting at the jaw, pulling back toward the ears. She is not fragile, Hale said. She is not secretive out of pathology. She is operationally bound. The men and women she serves, and I will not identify them further, depend on her judgment, her discretion, and her presence in environments that would psychologically disqualify most clinicians within their first rotation. He turned to face me again. Not the judge, not the attorneys. Me. The billet designation for clinical support attached to the unit where Lieutenant Commander Trelawney served was Whiskey Tango. He said it quietly, almost conversationally. The way you say something meant for one person in a room full of people. It meant nothing to anyone in that courtroom. It meant everything to me. Hale looked back at the judge. I recommend the petition be denied in its entirety. I further recommend that Dr. Webb's credentials and methodology be referred to the Virginia Board of Psychology for independent review. And I recommend that Lieutenant Commander Trelawney retain full primary custody of her daughter, with no supervised visitation conditions. He folded his hands on the witness stand. That concludes my testimony, Your Honor. The room held. 5 seconds. 6. The fluorescent light above the judge's bench flickered once and steadied. Clyde's manila folder slipped from his lap. It hit the gray carpet with a sound like a door closing. Papers fanned across the floor. His handwritten statements, Webb's report, the school pickup logs he had compiled with such meticulous, misguided certainty. He did not bend to pick them up. His mouth moved. No sound came. Then, barely, I didn't. She never said. His hands were shaking. Not trembling. Shaking. The way hands shake when the body understands something the mind hasn't caught up to yet. Dale reached for his father's arm. Clyde pulled away. He leaned forward in his chair, then back, then forward again. A man looking for a position that didn't exist. A posture that could hold what had just happened. Judge Coleman removed her reading glasses. She set them on the bench. Dr. Hale, she said. Thank you. You may step down. Hale stood. He buttoned his suit jacket with one hand. He stepped down from the witness stand. And as he passed the gallery, as he passed Clyde's row, and Dale's rigid shoulders, and Margaret's white knuckles, he stopped beside my chair. He did not speak loudly. He did not perform. He extended his hand. Lieutenant Commander Trelawney, he said. It's good to see you again, ma'am. I stood. I took his hand. I held it for 2 seconds. Commander Hale. Thank you. He nodded once. The kind of nod that carries rank. That carries years. That carries the specific weight of one professional, recognizing another in a room full of people who never understood what they were looking at. He walked to the back of the courtroom and sat down, and 4 members of my family, including the man who had called me unfit, went very, very quiet. Judge Coleman let the silence hold. She was not rushed. She had spent 23 years on this bench. She understood what silence could do in a courtroom when the architecture of someone's certainty had just collapsed. She placed both hands flat on the bench. The court has reviewed both evaluations in full. The court has heard testimony from Dr. Webb and from Dr. Hale. The court has reviewed the guardian ad litem's report, the petitioner's submitted statements, and the respondent's service record to the extent permitted by classification. She looked at Clyde, not with anger, not with pity, with the measured clarity of a woman who had seen 1,000 versions of this and understood exactly what she was looking at. Mr. Trelawney, I want to be direct with you. You filed this petition in what I believe you genuinely regard as your granddaughter's best interest. I do not doubt that you love Lily. But love is not a license to dismantle a fit parent's custody based on a paid evaluation that does not meet basic professional standards, diagnostic terminology that does not exist, and a fundamental misunderstanding of your daughter's professional obligations. Clyde's jaw worked. No sound came. The petition is denied. Full primary custody remains with Lieutenant Commander Rosamond Trelawney. No supervised visitation conditions are imposed. The respondent's parenting capacity is not in question. She turned a page in her notes. Additionally, this court is referring Dr. Marcus Webb's evaluation methodology and credentials to the Virginia Board of Psychology for independent review. Dr. Webb, you should expect correspondence within 30 days. Webb's leather portfolio closed with a snap. His face had gone the color of old cement. Finally, the court finds that the petitioner's action imposed an unreasonable legal and financial burden on the respondent. Pursuant to Virginia Code, Section 20-124.2, the respondent is awarded recovery of attorney's fees and associated costs in the amount of $16,800 to be paid by the petitioner within 90 days. Clyde flinched. It was small, a contraction around the eyes, but I saw it. I had spent 9 years reading micro-expressions in men trained to show nothing. My father was not trained. He showed everything. $16,800. The number landed in that courtroom like a stone dropped into still water. Judge Coleman closed her file. This hearing is concluded. She stood. The bailiff called the room to its feet. She exited through the door behind the bench. And then it was just us. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The gray carpet absorbed every sound except breathing. My attorney gathered his documents beside me with quiet efficiency. He placed one hand briefly on my shoulder, said nothing, and stepped toward the aisle. I did not move. Not yet. I sat with my hands folded. The same posture I'd held for the entire hearing. The same posture I'd held at that dining table in Chesapeake 3 weeks ago. The same posture I'd held in briefing rooms and forward operating locations and clinical sessions with men who carried things they could never set down. Clyde stood slowly. He looked at the papers still fanned across the carpet at his feet. Dale bent to collect them. His hands moved quickly, clumsily, stuffing pages back into the manila folder without order, without tabs, without the meticulous certainty that had organized them 3 weeks ago on the side table next to the recliner. Gerald Harris leaned toward Clyde and said something I could not hear. Clyde shook his head, then shook it again. His lips moved. She never said. I stood. The room shifted. Dale froze with the folder half closed in his hands. Margaret looked up from her lap for the first time since Hale had finished his testimony. Clyde turned toward me with the slow rotation of a man whose body no longer trusted its own balance. I did not raise my voice. I did not step toward them. I adjusted the pin on my lapel. The silver caught the fluorescent light for half a second. Dad. One word. His name. The name I'd called him for 39 years. It stopped him like a hand on his chest. You didn't want the truth. You wanted a confession. He opened his mouth. You spent 14 years deciding that what I do isn't real. You measured my work against Dale's because his has a logo on a truck, and mine doesn't have a name you're allowed to hear. You told Mom I was broken. You told Dale I was broken. You told a man with a degree from a defunct university that I was broken, and you paid him $1,200 to write it down in language that sounded clinical enough to hold up in a courtroom. My voice did not shake. My hands did not tremble. I had held steadier than this in rooms where the stakes were measured in lives, not custody agreements. But I was never broken. I was bound. There is a difference, and you never once asked which one it was. Clyde's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes were wet. Not crying. Not yet. Just the involuntary response of a man whose body had begun processing what his mind could not yet accept. I didn't, he started. But you did. 2 words. I let them land. Dale set the folder on the chair beside him. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It was not guilt, exactly. It was the first fracture in a framework he had never been asked to question. The first hairline crack in a structure Clyde had built for him over 44 years. He said nothing. For the first time in his life, Dale Trelawney had nothing to say. Margaret stood. Her purse slid to the floor. She did not pick it up. She took 1 step toward me and stopped. Her hands were shaking the way Clyde's had been moments before. But hers shook differently. Not from shock, from the weight of something she had carried for months without understanding what it was. She had signed a document. She had signed it because Clyde put it in front of her and said, "It's for Lily." She understood now what it had cost. I looked at her. I held her gaze. I did not offer forgiveness. I did not offer anger. Mom. She pressed her lips together. A single tear tracked down her left cheek. She nodded. That was all. A nod that carried the specific gravity of a woman who had deferred for 42 years and was only now beginning to understand the price. I picked up my bag. I walked past them, past Clyde, who had not moved from the spot where the judge's ruling had planted him. Past Dale, whose crossed arms had not returned to their position. Past Webb, who was already moving toward the exit with the urgency of a man who understood that his professional future had just been measured and found short. Commander Hale was standing near the back of the courtroom. He had waited, not because protocol required it, because he understood what this moment was. As I approached, he straightened. Not to attention. Not formally. The way one officer straightens in the presence of another when the room doesn't require ceremony, but respect demands acknowledgement. Lieutenant Commander. Commander. A beat. 2 seconds of silence that held more than any sentence could. Whiskey Tango is in good hands, he said, quietly. The corner of his mouth moved a fraction of an inch. Always has been, sir. He nodded. He stepped aside. I walked through the courtroom door and into the hallway, where the air smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and old coffee, and the particular brand of nothing that government buildings cultivate as their signature fragrance. I did not look back. Some wars are not fought with fists. They are one in what happens next. I drove to Lily's school. I arrived 11 minutes before the second grade dismissal bell. I parked in the pickup line and turned off the engine. I sat in the car with my hands on the steering wheel. I counted to 12. Then the doors opened and children poured out in that specific chaos of backpacks and lunchboxes and untied shoes, and voices pitched at frequencies only 7-year-olds can sustain. And there she was, Lily Trelawney Walsh. 37 pounds of unfiltered certainty. Her backpack was half unzipped. Her left shoe was untied. She was holding a piece of paper in both hands, carrying it in front of her like a tray, protecting it from the wind. She climbed into the back seat. She buckled herself in. She held the paper up. "Mom, look." It was a drawing, 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing together. The tall one had brown hair pulled back and a small silver dot on her chest that Lily had colored with a metallic crayon. The small one was holding the tall one's hand. Across the bottom, in uneven second-grade handwriting, "Mom and me." I took the drawing. I held it with both hands the way she had held it crossing the schoolyard. I looked at it for a long time. "It's beautiful, Lily." "That's your pin," she said, pointing at the silver dot. "The one you always wear." "I see it." I told Mrs. Anderson my mom wears a special pin because she helps people. She said that was nice. I placed the drawing on the passenger seat, face up, where it would ride beside me all the way home. "She's right," I said. "That is nice." I started the car. We drove home. Lily talked about recess and a boy named Thomas who had put a carrot in someone's shoe, and a book her teacher was reading to the class about a dog who sailed a boat. I listened to every word. I had spent 9 years listening to men describe the worst moments of their lives. Listening to my daughter describe a carrot in a shoe was the closest thing to grace I had ever known. Silence had always been the language of my life. Imposed first by a family that didn't want to hear me, enforced later by a clearance that wouldn't let me speak. I had lived inside that silence for so long that I had forgotten it could be anything other than wait. Now I understood. Silence was never the absence of truth. It was the container that held it until the room was ready. 8 months after the ruling, I filed the paperwork to establish a pro bono custody defense clinic at the Naval Station Norfolk Legal Assistance Office. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Scott co-signed the proposal. We called it the Anchor Initiative. In its first year, it served 40 military mothers facing custody challenges rooted in deployment schedules, classification constraints, and the specific brand of misunderstanding that civilian courts apply to women who serve in roles the public cannot see. 40 families. 40 mothers who sat across from me in a small office with bad lighting and government furniture and said some version of the same sentence. They don't believe what I do is real. I believed them. Every one. Dr. Marcus Webb's license review by the Virginia Board of Psychology resulted in a formal censure and a 2-year supervised practice requirement. His evaluation methodology was cited as procedurally deficient and clinically unsound. His report on my case was struck from the record. Clyde paid the $16,800. It took him the full 90 days. Dale helped him cover the last $4,000. Neither of them called me to discuss it. Neither of them called me at all for 3 months. Then, on a Tuesday evening in February, my phone rang. It was not Clyde. It was not Dale. It was Margaret. She did not apologize. She did not explain. She did not ask for forgiveness or offer justifications or attempt to rewrite what had happened. She said, "I'm proud of you, Rosamond. No conditions. No advice. Just that. I held the phone against my ear for 5 seconds after she finished. I could hear her breathing. I could hear the television in the background. The same evening news she had watched every night for 40 years, in the same living room where my photograph did not hang. Thank you, Mom. That was all. She hung up. I set the phone on the kitchen counter. Lily was at the table doing her homework. She did not look up. I work at Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek now. Same office, same billet, same clearance. I see the same men and women I have always seen. I hold the same things I have always held. My nameplate on the door says Lieutenant Commander R. Trelawney, and sometimes the operators I work with call me ma'am, and sometimes they call me doc, and sometimes they call me nothing at all, because they are sitting in a chair across from me trying to find the words for something that doesn't have words yet, and my job is to hold the silence until they do. No titles at home, no plaques, no framed commendations above the fireplace. Just Rosamond. Just a mother who picks up her daughter from school at 3:15 and listens to stories about carrots in shoes and dogs on boats, and whatever else a 7-year-old considers urgent enough to say out loud. There is power in patience. There is freedom in truth, even when it comes late. And there is a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, doesn't perform, doesn't need a manila folder or a courtroom or a family's permission to exist. It just is. Quiet, steady, unbroken. I am no longer missing from the mantle. Not because someone put my photograph back, but because I no longer need a wall in someone else's house to prove I was here. If you enjoyed this story about quiet competence winning over loud arrogance, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.